Awesome. I see a lot of familiar names floating into the chat. We're at a 7:05 now. I'm going to go ahead and just give some preliminary intro and some guidance for y'all who are here. Welcome. For those of y'all who do not know me, my name is Kate Kelly, and I am the programs manager for the Library Foundation Austin. We are the nonprofit organization that supports the Austin Public Library. We also provide programming such as this program tonight for you all. For those of you in town, those of you from on either coast, we're very glad that you're here with us tonight. A few kind of, programmatic points of order to note. Tonight's program is going to be divided up into two halves. The first half is going to be a reading portion in which you'll hear from the three poets that are here on the screen with me tonight. You'll be hearing from Sequoia Maner, from KB, and from Amanda Johnston. The second half of our portion is going to be more of a roundtable conversation in which the poets and I are going to sit down. We are going to discuss the poems, discuss the issues behind the poems, discuss all that we mean when we say that poetry can act as praise, as protest, as power. And then we're also going to be engaging you all in that conversation through the question and answer button. So if you've not participated in a Zoom webinar before, if you look at the bottom of your screen along the bar of different Zoom features, you'll see the question and answer feature. That is where you can submit questions tonight. So as you hear the poems being read, as you hear these poets speaking about the poems and how they were made and the power that comes behind all of that, feel free to submit questions through that feature. We will not be looking to the chat for the questions. That's an important distinction. Feel free to send your love through the chat, as y'all are already doing, which is awesome and amazing. And also feel free to add any praise. Like if you hear a line that you love and you just want to type it and add it to the chat, feel free. That is a place for you to celebrate tonight. So those are kind of our points of order. That's what our agenda is going to look like. And before we dive straight into the readings, I want to say tonight that this event would not exist without a very special book that I want to highlight. And that book is Revisiting the Elegy in the Black Lives Matter Era. This book is very special to me for many reasons, professional and personal, but I'm very honored tonight that we have one of the co-editors of this book, Sequoia Maner, who's going to be reading first. We would not be here without Sequoia, and we would not be here without this book. This book is one of the 2020 Mayor's Book Club picks for Austin, so we are encouraging Austinites to grab a copy and to engage in this book and its beautiful work. Just to give you all an introduction, I'm going to read the introduction, not the whole thing. I'm going to read the first paragraph of the introduction, because I think we're all coming here tonight with questions about the state of our world, the dual pandemics that are going on that we're going to talk about tonight, questions about poetry, which is always a difficult topic to talk about as well on its own terms. And I think that this intro does such a nice job of situating those questions and aligning us with the deep history of the elegy and how poetry is a through line for us all. So this is from the introduction to Revisiting the Elegy and the Black Lives Matter Era. The murder of Trayvon Martin on February 26, 2012, and his killer's exoneration in June of the following year set the stage for the contemporary liberation movement known as Black Lives Matter, and the newly invigorated conversations about systemic racism currently underway, conversations in which creative writers have taken active and visible roles. Their writing attempts to answer poet Claudia Rankines' question, what kind of country do we live in? With a clear-eyed poignancy that acts as a bulwark against apathy and complacency. In this volume, we too ruminate on the nation's inequitable state of affairs as we turn our attention to the genre most associated with mourning, the elegy. What kind of elegiac responses are most appropriate to police killings, their surveillance of Black communities, and the slow violence of socioeconomic disparities, among other structural forms of racism. How have and how must contemporary elegists innovate within and against the tradition of elegy to account for bodies deemed disposable by the state? In what ways does the elegiac mode facilitate healing, help us to cope with, meditate on, and work to build healthy, sustainable futures informed by this systemic pattern of loss? How do we productively interweave theoretical and personal accounts to encourage discussions about art and activism that transgress disciplinary boundaries? Ultimately, what role does elegiac writing play in both the political movements for and personal commitment to Black lives? These are the questions that revisiting the elegy and the Black Lives Matter era centralizes. I'm sure you have really central questions that are bringing you to tonight's conversation. I encourage you to push into those, to write as you listen, to ask questions in the Q&A tool, and continue to think about some of these questions as we listen to our poets this evening. So our first poet, as I said, we would not be here without this book, and this book would not be here without Sequoia, and Sequoia, we would not be here without you. Sequoia Maner was a Mellon Teaching Fellow of Feminist Studies at Southwestern University for 2018 through 2020. She recently joined the English department at Spelman College as an assistant professor. She earned her BA in English from Duke University and her MA and PhD degrees in English from the University of Texas at Austin. Her poem, Upon Reading the Autopsy of Sandra Bland, was a finalist for the 2017 Gwendolyn Brooks Poetry Prize. Her essays, poems, and reviews can be found in venues such as Meridian, Obsidian, the Langston Hughes Review, the Feminist Wire, Auburn Avenue, and elsewhere. That is the formal biography of Sequoia. But what I want to say is that Sequoia has this deep wisdom and energy that she employs in all that she does. And y'all are going to feel some of that tonight. She's not just a poet, scholar, and educator. She's an alchemist with language. She's a careful curator of necessary resistance, and she's capable of channeling powerful truths into our world. When I think about the state of our world right now, I know that moving forward, we all need new language, right? We need new language for all of this. And I look to her as someone that I know has new language for us. Sequoia is someone that is a gift to every classroom and community that she enters. So please join me in welcoming Sequoia to our virtual stage. Thank you.
Wow, that was a beautiful introduction. And I find myself in this pandemic, oscillating between emotional states. I try to hold on to whatever little joy I can find, but we're living in a long period of sadness and grief. And I find myself, sometimes I just burst into some tears, and we got to get those tears out. So the introduction was so beautiful, and it brought some tears to my eyes, but I also want to get through these poems and read them for you. So I'm going to try to suck it in. And today I am going to read elegies. 2 elegies that are published in the book that Kate was talking about. And then I'll see if I have enough time to try out some new work on you guys. I haven't been able to write much during this pandemic, but a little bit has come out. So I'll try that out on you. Thank you so much for being here. You could have been anywhere tonight and you're here. So thank you. This first poem I'm going to read for you is called Black Boy Contrapuntal, and it's for Trayvon Martin. And the only thing that you need to know about this poem is that there are 2 voices. So I'll read the first voice, and then I'll read the second voice. And then you'll hear repetition because I'm going to read those voices together. And while I wrote this poem upon the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin, trying to work through that grief and that anger, this poem could also be for Ahmaud Arbery. It could also be for many other Black lives. Black Boy Contrapuntal. I am American first. I have Black friends and race is past. It's a civic duty, patrolling the block for a thug, performing the ritual again. He kept looking, staring, relentless, and it was raining. There's been a history of Black boys breaking in. They always get away while walking suspiciously tall, talking suspiciously boastful, tasting blood and refusing to call it fear. But I've seen it rise in their eyes. We all learn our lessons. Stand ground and walk. First impression, I don't belong here anymore. Past, invisible, odd, I'm treated like a thug, a nuisance. I was suspended again. A walk to clear the brain. And it was raining, drops weighty as bullets breaking in the neighborhood. Walking and feeling the need to run, talking and feeling the need to yell, tasting something acrid like adrenaline or fear, hidden in a hoodie and headphones. The legible body of a man, boy not yet grown. We all learn our lessons. Walk away, refuse the urge to run. I am American. First impression, I don't belong here anymore. I have Black friends and race is past, invisible, odd. I am treated like a civic duty, patrolling the block for a thug, a nuisance, suspended performing the ritual again. A walk to clear the brain. He kept looking, staring, relentless, and it was raining drops weighty as bullets. There's been a history of Black boys breaking in the neighborhood. They always get away while walking and feeling the need to run suspiciously tall, talking and feeling the need to yell suspiciously boastful, tasting something acrid like adrenaline or blood and refusing to call it fear, hidden in a hoodie and headphones. I've seen it rise in their eyes, a legible body of a man, boy not yet grown. We all learn our lessons. Stand ground, walk away, refuse the urge to run. Thank you. It's so odd not being able to hear little snaps or claps, but thank you. The second one is called Upon Reading the Autopsy of Sandra Bland. And I will just say a couple little words about this poem. Sandra Bland and I were the same age. She had recently moved back to Texas, was pulled over, harassed, and jailed just a few hours from where Austin, KB, Kate, and I live, on a road that, we travel frequently. I did not know Sandra Bland personally, but through her videos, I felt like I knew her and I loved her and that we were something like kindred spirits. And I still love her. Around the same time that I was writing this poem, a very famous white poet named Kenneth Goldsmith decided that he would read Michael Brown's autopsy report to an audience and call it poetry. It was nothing like poetry. It was quite disgusting. And I wrote this poem kind of in response, thinking about what could be made of the autopsy report, what could be made of these violent state documents. And this is what came out. It's called Upon Reading the Autopsy of Sandra Bland. The words of the medical examiner read, "The neck is remarkable for a ligature furrow." And you are unwoven by the combination of these two words, ligature and furrow, because furrow describes a groove or rut in the ground or in the surface of something like tender skin. A furrow is a depression dug out for seeding. How odd, the furrowing set next to ligature, which derives from the Latin ligare, meaning to tie or bind. The word ligature is tough and flexible, like the larynx. It holds the state of being bound or stiffened, like the body in solitary confinement, like the body in rigor mortis in solitary confinement. It moves beyond the act of binding to capture the thing that performs the act of binding, like a cord or a similar something, like a plastic bag. But the ligature is also the thread used in surgery to close a vessel or remove a tumor. And you think about how the body is a vessel and how she had no tumors, how the trachea is an instrument moving currents of air into and out of lungs, how in music, A ligature is both the group of notes played as a phrase and the curved line that indicates such a phrase. How remarkable is the spine that is line and curve and holding up all you have ever loved, a single harmonic texture. And you are reminded of how language folds into itself, because the word ligature indicates suspension of intellectual or physical powers, leaves no room for miscarriage or epilepsy or prayer. Not to mention, in typography, the ligature is a character that combines multiple letters, like the AE in vertebrae. And so many common words once contained space enough for small couplings. Words like economy and hemorrhage and tragedy and fetus and federal, and you wonder if Sandra knew that bound up in her furrowing was a history of how easily the body rends. Thank you. So I haven't written much during the pandemic. I've been writing these little sing-song things that have about this little girl. Her name is Little Girl Blue. And I think that Little Girl Blue might be me. So there are these little short ditties, and I'll read maybe 2 of them, and I think that will be my time. So this is Little Girl Blue 1. Little Girl Blue, you blewed your horn of mourning and warning into whirlwind and pollen squalls. You asked, where are we gonna get clean? In the lake or the stream? In the break or in the dream? Or somewhere, someplace in between? Little Girl Blue, you traded your horn for a cry, but when you hailed into the gales, only a small, faint sigh, and 2 white doves cooing, my, oh my. Hey, Blue Girl, Girl Blue, what you gonna do? It's coming. And this is Little Girl Blue 2. And this one's very new. I maybe wrote it like last week. Across an ocean of time and a sea of space, the current stays swift, the waters rage, rage, rage. The cities buckle and the land replenishes. Proof nothing in this world diminishes your splendor, Blue Girl. For energy never dies, just moves on, transfigures, makes use, and revives. So go on, Blue Girl, Little Girl Blue. This world is made of you. My, oh my. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Sequoia. I saw in the chat, Austin Rodenbiker wrote, I wish I could applaud after these poems. And I was like, I'm applauding. Thank you. Thank you. I cannot wait for us to talk later about all of that, including Little Girl Blue. I don't know what you mean when you say you haven't been writing the pandemic. That was amazing. That was amazing. Thank you, Sequoia. Our next poet who's going to be taking our virtual stage is KB. I'm going to again read the formal biography and then share my personal love for KB. KB is a Black, queer, genderless poet, educator, organizer, and student affairs professional based in Austin, Texas. They have earned many fellowships and publications, most notably from Lambda Literary, The Watering Hole, and Cincinnati Review. When they're not on stage or in the page, they serve as program coordinator for the Gender and Sexuality Center at the University of Texas at Austin, teaching artist for the Austin Library Foundation, and founder/lead organizer of Interfaces. You can catch them talking sweetness and other non-human things online at Earth to KB. Definitely encourage checking them out on there. But also, like, that's the bio. Okay, like what's the real love? KB, y'all. I first met KB back in 2018 when I had first started working for the Library Foundation, and they came in to apply to work as a teaching artist with our Badger Dog creative writing program. And I remember from the moment they came in, like their passion for poetry was palpable. to the point where they were like literally looking up poems in the middle of the interview and like reading them to me, which I thought was so cool and like no one had ever done before. I think people are normally very like like try to be like professional in whatever they think that means. And KB was like, let's just talk poetry, which I thought was so the core of what we all should be doing anyway. So that was just a beautiful first meeting moment. And then from there, it's been amazing to see all that KB has created in Austin. Not only during their formal work at UT, but also with ATX interfaces. If you are not already familiar, well, interfaces, sometimes it says ATX online, but interfaces is doing amazing work across Austin in the virtual space. They've made the big pivot in a big way. And we're going to talk more about that in the roundtable. So more coming up from KB on the stage and later in our conversations. But KB, I can't wait to hear what you have. You are always surprising me, and your passion is, like I said, palpable. So let's hear it. Welcome, KB.
Whoa, thank you. That was a really nice, really nice intro. I probably forgot about that because sometimes I'm just like, I don't know, like I just thought about this poem and then I'm gonna show you it because otherwise I'm gonna forget, right? And professionalism is just never where my mind is. So I appreciate you for setting that. I'm gonna just read a couple new things. I definitely want to try out some new things. And I'm right there with you, Sequoia. I haven't been writing very much. I think the writing has been working on me more than anything. I've just been having thoughts. So I'm really excited to think with y'all and share some of those thoughts with y'all. Starting with an oldie but a goodie. Right now, I live in Austin, Texas, in the blackest and brownest zip code, and I'm just so happy about that. But 10 minutes away from where I'm at, I'm just kind of like shocked, even within the pandemic, with all of this kind of like gentrification stuff going on. And I think it's just always topical to talk about, especially as things change more and more, and people feel emboldened to change those things while people are more inside. But yeah, I have this poem called Transplant, and it's essentially about my experience being a transplant of Austin. And I'm gonna randomly say like indicators of gentrification, as well as kind of like revert back to a story, just so y'all know that's what's happening. Coffee shop, bike lane, yoga studio, dog park. You walk into HEB and are the only Black person. You heard the story, right? The big twist is that they're the only store with the House of Sang peanut sauce, so you roll your basket to the ethnic spices aisle. One wheel touches white man's heel, you say sorry. He hears sinner. Juice shop, Whole Foods, construction sign, co-op. White girl says, this new bar doesn't attract all the weird locals. You immediately think of college. White girl said your side of town was sketchy and that didn't end well, so you get your drink and leave, draped in all this transplant guilt. Are you the gentrifier or the weird local? You share the area code of one in the face of another. Vintage shop, pop-up, help wanted, nonprofit. Can one suffocate from overwhelming whiteness? You Google this before bed. White girl at the feminist bookstore you work at says hola to your Latinx friend. She asks what's up after saying hello to everyone else. Despite the bad lighting, you see the gleam of good intentions in her eyes. You say nothing, softly back. Corporate headquarters, fake trees, order maintenance. You try not to get all shamed when 50 Cent comes on in the club. You wonder if leaving everything behind was for this. White man gets in the middle of your dance circle and you turn. Eventually, everyone turns. Eventually, he tries to handshake. You offer a dap instead. You wonder if keep blank weird is a typo. You drink margs at brunch in the business they call city. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Blank percent increase. Blank school closed due to lack of enrollment. For sale. Contact realtor. Thank you. Yay. So we're gonna move on to new things now. I appreciate y'all. I saw this like tweet the other day that was like, the difference between prose poetry and flash fiction is vibes. And I like 100% agree. What is genre but like the drawing of a line, right? So I have like, I don't know, I've been having a lot of long thoughts and they've just become these kind of prosy poems. So I want to read some to y'all and just see if y'all feel the vibes. Even like, let me know how you feel, because it's still stuff like in progress. This one is called I'll Miss the Women's Restroom. I recently got top surgery, which is yay, but now I get mistaken for a dude a lot more and a cis man a lot more. And going to the restroom is just this whole new experience, right? Because there are only men and women's restrooms in like 99.9% of places. But anyway, it's a poem about that. I'll miss the women's restroom. How it always smells like death, but when it doesn't, you enter a utopia. Fluorescent lights, baby changing station, all faux lavender and Febreze plugins, all hand sanitizer and cloth-like paper towels to harden your thirsty, wet hands. Some even have baskets of tampons, or soft music lulling your troubles away from the last stall. How I'll miss the lack of piss stains on the wall and threats of danger, mostly in the form of words. Are you a man? Admittedly feels safer than a punch thrown at the throat. How I'll miss passing for a non-punchable punching bag, how this weary rest stop sometimes feels like resting. I'll miss men saying, excuse me, on the way to their restroom. Miss the women saying, do you, when I needed the last available stall. I'll miss when anxiety feels like the only rite of passage and when my appearance isn't synonymous with violence. The stares, the clutching of purses, the talks about men being allowed in here now, the being on display, the invisibility. If you don't acknowledge them, they can't be real. The reminder that I'm wrong, the eyes of unsafety and discomfort that make me unsafe and uncomfortable, the alternative being violence. The present being violence, the contemplation on which violence is worse, the alternative not thought of. If you don't acknowledge them, they can't be real. The alternative denied, the eyes that tell me I'm wrong, the men's room waiting line, how it prepares my body for violence. Yesterday, a man unlocked the men's restroom when I asked for a restroom to be unlocked, and that felt a little like practice. And the willingness to look the other way, or at least in finding power in arbitrary distinctions. I feel my most manly saying nothing when I should. How good peck pumping feels when conversation pursues among the dank smell in the men's restroom. How do I write myself out of a war? How do I write myself out of centuries of power and right to rage due to genitalia and a flat chest? I opt into one but carry the elegy of both. When I enter my new excretory destination, I insist on going to a stall. Standing simply can't hold this madness. The fear of voice, the emission of my voice, the squints, the hyper visibility of my hips, the punch to the face, the kick to what is still a uterus, the pummeling of one unsafe space to another, the history, the federally mandated violence, the insistence on living knowing that it would be easier not, the desire, the wanting, the fantasy, but only a fantasy of better, the history of my living. If you don't acknowledge them, they can't be real. The choir of faggots and dykes and names that are not my own. Every morning on my path to my work single-stall restroom, I perceive a savior. She wears an off-white dress draped in black plastic. I never knew the mold of old home smelled like lemon. I never knew a whiff of nostalgia could bring a body to ache. I miss the women's restroom, but not nearly as much as I miss the flood of feminine around me. The stepping into a world that saw you as other than yourself, but at least a shield, and at least almost, and at least alive. Cool, that's where that stops. Yeah, thanks, y'all. I appreciate y'all for listening and receiving that. I'm gonna read a last one. It's a poem of many things, I guess, that I wrote in June specifically. And that was when I guess people really cared about Black issues. I don't know. I'm not even gonna be snarky yet. But yeah, it's about upon hearing the news about Tony McDade, but again, that could be, you know, a placeholder for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Mike Ramos, so on and so forth. I blinked and sat up. I locked my phone. I brushed my teeth. I ran a mile in 70 degrees. I cleaned my face. I ate breakfast and checked the news. I did push-ups, then burpees, then squats. I breath focused. I body scanned. I showered off sweat and dead skin. I applied lotion and then deodorant. I logged into the virtual work meeting. I accepted sorries at the virtual work meeting. I signed the petition. I checked the news. I told coworkers that I'm okay. I fogged my glasses as I picked up the mail. I fogged my glasses as I cried over the mail. I told the mailman that I'm okay. I accepted Venmos and Cash Apps. I logged into the teach-in. I accepted DMs. I accepted them dripping with guilt. I told anxiety to close the door behind it. I accepted the thoughts and prayers. I contemplated going to the protest. I told myself that now I'm listening. I fogged my glasses as I sat outside. I accepted the gifts and selective outrage. I tried to believe it wasn't temporary. I checked the news. I cried again. I vowed to stay offline and sleep again. I logged out of the virtual workday. I contemplated, and at the very least, I tried. I watched the fire end and the cycle re-begin. I blinked and sat up. I lived, then I locked my phone. That's it. And yeah, thank y'all. Thank y'all for having me. Very excited to continue to be around.
Thank you, KB. I feel like you just offered up so much right now. Thank you for all of that, and for all that we can. I want to talk about all of this right now, but I'm like holding back until we get to the roundtable, because we have one more poet to hear from, and I'm very excited to introduce this poet. This is Amanda Johnston. For those of y'all who are here tonight, I hope you know Amanda. And if you don't, I am excited for you to know Amanda in what she is going to be sharing with us right now. So for those of you who do not know, Amanda Johnston was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, and raised in Austin, Texas. She began writing poetry while living in Kentucky. Shout out Kentucky. Since then, her writing has been published widely, and she has presented at numerous literary conferences and events. Amanda earned a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Southern Maine. She is the author of 2 chapbooks, Guap and Lock and Key, and the author of the full-length collection, Another Way to Say Enter, from Argus House Press. If you do not have this, you should check it out and get it. Her poetry and interviews have appeared in numerous online and print publications, among them Callaloo Poetry, Puerto del Sol, Muzzle Pluck, No Deer, and the anthologies Small Batch, Full, Diversity, The Ringing Ear, Black Poets Leaning South, and Women of Resistance, Poems for a New Feminism. Honors include the Christina Sarajeeva Award for the Austin International Poetry Festival, a joint finalist for the Freedom Plow Award for Poetry and Activism from Split This Rock, and multiple artist enrichment grants from Kentucky Foundation for Women. Amanda is a member of the Afro-Latin Poets and has received fellowships from Cave Canem Foundation and the Austin Project at the University of Texas. Johnston's a Stonecast MFA faculty member, a co-founder of Black Poets Speak Out, and founder/executive director of Torch Literary Arts. She serves on the Cave Canem Foundation Board of Directors and currently lives in Texas. Whew, Amanda does a lot. That bio tells you a lot, but what it doesn't tell you is that Amanda is herself a torch. in addition to running Torch. She is a torch within our Austin area community. I first met her at a Torch Literary Arts reading event. I was there to see a mutual friend who was also an Appalachian poet, Ellen Hagen. And when we met, Amanda told me, she said, "Oh, you're from Kentucky. Kentucky's my poetry home." And I thought that was such a beautiful way of thinking about life, that we all have different homes for different spaces of ourselves. And what Amanda does in all of these organizations that she leads and runs and all of these events that she curates, she creates homes. And I think in her own way, Amanda, you acknowledge in all of it that we're all under the same roof and we all have to figure out how to live this life. And those are going to be tough, hard conversations, but you know how to guide and how to lead that. And I am just eternally grateful for her and all that she means. We are going to talk more about all of her work, including her work with Black Poets Speak Out, a little later. But for now, I'm just grateful to be in this world and this virtual Zoom room with her. Let's welcome to our virtual stage, Amanda Johnston.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Kate. Yes, Kentucky will always be my poetry home. That's where it helped guide me in my voice and Appalachian poets. And then they let me out into the world, and wow, I don't know why they did that. But here we are. And thank you so much, KB and Sequoia. Always beautiful to be in company with you and to hear your incredible poetry. Thank you. Thank you so much. And for all of you who are joining us, like Sequoia said, you could have been anywhere. You could have been asleep. We in a pandemic, so life is rough right now. So thank you for showing up and being here with us to listen, hear, and talk about poetry and what we can do together in this world. I'm going to first read a poem from the book Revisiting the Elegy in the Black Lives Matter Era. Sequoia, you and the other editors did an incredible job. This is an important collection to have. I encourage you all to go and get your copy, have your libraries purchase it and have it available for students. This is important documentation for the time that we are in. This poem is by Angela Jackson Brown. I must not breathe. If I'm stopped by the cops, I must be quiet. I must not breathe. I must not ask questions. I must not breathe. I must not move. I must not breathe. I must not talk back. I must be compliant. I must not breathe. I must not film the cop. I must not call family or friends. I must not breathe. I must not put my hands up or down. I must not breathe. I must cooperate. I must be docile. I must stay in the car or get out depending on the mood of the cop. I must not breathe too loudly or too quietly. I must only do what I am told. Even if what I am told to do goes against my basic civil rights, I must not breathe. I must hope that the cop is having a good day. I must hope that the cop is a good cop. I must hold my breath and not breathe. I must not be suicidal. I must not be angry. I must be civil. I must be obedient. I must grin and show all of my teeth. I must shuffle and dance, but only on cue. I must not get stopped, but if I run, I must be prepared to die. I must be prepared to die. Angela Jackson Brown. Thank you. I have not been writing, not a lick, I promise you. I have been focused on survival. But now these, 6 months now that we've been into this, it's starting to come back. And it's a great reminder that, all of this living is what poetry is made of. So at the end of the day, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like you're struggling or failing in some area, if you are hearing this, if you are alive right now, you are doing exactly what you need to be doing. You're doing exactly what must be done. Live, just live, and we'll make it to the point where you can thrive and do everything else. But first, just live, in and out, just keep breathing. I'm gonna read a couple poems from the book, Another Way to Say Enter. No good deed goes unpunished. I see the white man driving next to me and consider every scenario of this moment as we approach a red light and what's at risk if I lower my window, expose my daughter and myself to the unknown repercussions of kindness. I calculate the risk involved to tell him his gas cap is open. His face, a concoction of morning traffic and time, ignores my initial honk and gesture toward his tank. My daughter asks, is it safe? I assure her I'll smile, be soft, do all the right things that in no way guarantee will survive this human interaction should he see danger, a threat in my concerned Black woman face. I honk again. I refuse to live in a world where we're too afraid to do what's right. The man turns toward our car, aware now of our existence, and the immediate future rests in his lap and what's beyond my understanding. He nods, drives off, gas cap dangling. My daughter corrects me, no, mama, the gas, is it safe? And I'm lost in meaning. What is safe in this burning for survival? Thank you. This next poem taken from a very real encounter that my daughter, my oldest daughter, had here in Austin. I'll read the poem first. It's called When My Daughter Wasn't Assaulted. She shook with fear, or was it guilt, at the officer's unraised hand and smile. How she leaned away slowly when he called a tow truck instead of backup. How her tears fled when he showed mercy over rage for the couple on the side of the highway, flat tire wasted against asphalt. She couldn't help but look at her white boyfriend pacing along this strip of road and wonder, what if this was a different part of Texas? What if this hero was a different shade of power? Would she be so lucky, or was it luck? If the absence of a known pain is just a heavy hand in repose. So my daughter and her boyfriend, who's now her husband, is a white man, and they had a simple flat tire. It happens, right? You're driving, you get a flat tire. But this was near the time when Sandra Bland, I believe she was murdered. She died in prison. I believe she was murdered. And my daughter was terrified that police were coming. And that says a lot about the culture and the space that we live in, when something as mundane as having a flat tire and needing to change it can elevate you into hysterical fear, where she had called me crying so hard I couldn't understand what she was saying. And when I could finally make out her words, she said, they got a flat and the police came. And I said, what happened? And she said, nothing, but it could have. It could have. And I realized what she needed from me in that moment, not just as her mother, but as another Black woman in this world with her, was to look at her, listen to her, and believe her. It could have happened. Something bad, dangerous, deadly could have happened to you just by being there. Let's see here. Night Hike. So there's this group that I think is really incredible called Outdoor Afros. And I went to a meeting here in Austin. If you're not familiar with them or you're interested, I don't know if they're still meeting. I hope they are. But if anything, this pandemic, many things have come to light during this pandemic, but our need for outdoor spaces, to be able to be out and experience our full human selves, like to be in nature, is our right as people, and we have to take care of those spaces. So anyway, Outdoor Afros is an incredible group that is bringing Black people together to go back to nature, just go back. But because of racism, because of oppression, because of segregation, because of all the things, Black people have literally been imprisoned for like going to beaches or trying to camp or trying to be in these spaces. So it really is a radical movement just to go back to nature. So I went to a meeting. I'll admit that I only went to one meeting. I'm working on being back in nature, but I'm a poet, so I got this poem out of it. Night Hike. The outdoor Afro's guide promises our eyes will adjust. Moonlight is enough to see the beauty in the dark. Without entering the woods, I see our blackness pull the grassy hem over our bodies. We appear from behind trees, hands up, covered in moss. We fit the description of dead leaves. A mass of mag-light teeth cut branches startle the wind from our limbs. Boulders clutch their earth. Pine trees lean away from our path. The moon, great witness in the sky, squints us into shadows of what was and wasn't there. I'll do one last poem. Thank you again so much for having us, and thank you to the Library Foundation, the Mayor's Book Club for making this possible. Facing us after Yusef Komanyaka. My black face fades, hiding inside black smoke. I knew they'd use it, damn it, tear gas. I'm grown, I'm fresh. Their clouded assumption eyes me like a runaway, guilty as night chasing morning. I run this way, the street lets me go. I turn that way, I'm inside the back of a police van again, depending on my attitude to be the difference. I run down the signs, half expecting to find my name protesting in ink. I touch the name Freddie Gray. I see the beat cops' worn eyes, names stretch across the people's banner, but when they walk away, the names fall from our lips. Paparazzi flash, call it riot. The ground, a body on the ground. A white cop's image hovers over us. Then his blank gaze looks through mine. I'm a broken window. He's raised his right arm, a gun in his hand. In the black smoke, a drone tracking targets. No, a crow gasping for air. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I so always appreciate hearing those poems. I've read them, I've heard you read some of them before, but whenever I hear it in a new moment, I find new meaning. And I think that speaks to the power of your poems and the power of poetry in general, right? But specifically thinking about why we need this work, why we need it now and always, right? We've always needed this. This is not a new thing. So with that, let's go ahead and transition now to the second part of our roundtable conversation this evening, so that we can dive further into this work. And what this looks like for you attendees is if you have questions or thoughts that have come into your head that you want to share while we have this conversation, feel free to add them to the Q&A. I see we have a few questions coming in now, which is excellent. We're gonna talk, chat, and then we'll pivot to your questions. So get those in as soon as you can so we don't miss you. I'm gonna go ahead. This is also my first webinar, y'all, so I'm sorry I'm a little slow on transitioning videos here. I'm gonna go ahead and get us all in the conversation here. Gallery view. All right, so y'all, let's talk. Let's first maybe go around and if y'all could just share some thoughts that came to your mind as we were listening tonight. Things that you're thinking about, things that feel fresh and new for you. Sequoia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think that we have a lot of resonances in our poetry, and something that I was thinking about, particularly with KB, was our embodiment as Black people, and how so often, because of the bodies that we inhabit, we live in a precarious situation always and already, right? And then thinking about the access axis of gender, right, sort of coupled with that brings a whole nother layer of danger to our bodies. As you were reading, I was also thinking about this slow violence, especially given that we're in the middle of a global health pandemic, and we have an inept and evil and corrupt administration that is exacerbating our deaths. We are sort of seeing the intersection of all of these slow violences, how they work together, right? So I'm thinking about how in all of our poems, we're touching on state violence as it manifests in policing, but we're also thinking about how, surveillance, and we're also thinking about gentrification and housing and, access to education, and all of these things are in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say we're just into pandemics all of the time. You know what I mean? Especially right now, with the ongoing health crisis. But racism is a health crisis also. You know what I mean? And that's a consistent health crisis within Black communities. And I find myself when I get, up in arms about the news, even, today, I'm like, I need to walk away because I'm giving this time of my life that it does not deserve. But it's also this duality of I have to understand how this changes the everyday things that I can do, right? So yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that as I'm as I was listening to both Amanda and Sequoia's work, and Sequoia, especially you kind of letting light in these kind of newer poems. I just felt all the joy, and I was just like, I need that. I really, really need that. So I appreciate you for that. And then Amanda, I really needed that, I guess, reminder that it's really bad for our wellness and for our health to get that up in arms every time we see a black and white car, right? Appearing at least even a little bit close to us, even if it's an old cop car that someone has just bought or something. I immediately feel my blood pressure spike. You know what I mean? As soon as I see a cop car. And it's something about that. It's something about that is just so unfair, to put it lightly. But yeah.
Absolutely. There's a reason why our DNA has changed over hundreds of years. There's a reason why Black people have higher blood pressure, are more at risk for heart disease, hypertension. It's all from that very real and intentional trauma and torture that we're continually having to endure. It's, death by 1,000 pricks, constantly. So no, hearing both of you work, I love the range in when we're talking about these experiences, right? It's a wonderful reminder too to the broader public, Black people, Black poets is not a monolith. It's not one note that you're gonna get. There's a million and one different experiences that are happening all at the same time, right? And they're all very important and necessary in telling a more whole and well-rounded expression of what it means to be a Black person in this time, in this place. So thank you both for sharing your work and touching on those different experiences, gentrification, gender, and playing with form, quite even that, I thought it was wonderful to hear that sonically. Those are the moments where we can't describe what is touching us, but music, poetry, the arts, it cuts through those outer layers into something that is uniquely human about us, whatever that thing is, right? Thank you. I appreciate you both.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think that is so true, that ephemeral quality of the poem that we feel, right? It's an experience that we move through. We have a great comment and question here from Jonathan, who I believe, Sequoia, this is your cousin. How wonderful, Jonathan. I'm so glad that you're here.
Wait,
Jonathan,
Kate, can I just say, because I think that it's very relevant. So I'm at a stage in my life, I just transitioned from Austin, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia. And for so long while I was in Austin, Texas, it was about professionalization, about getting my degrees, about working towards that next step, also doing community work, right? Focused on literacy campaigns, writing elegies, performing elegies. And now during this pandemic, I have started to reconnect with family, and I am remembering how important that is. So Jonathan and I, he's my first cousin. He's in Los Angeles. We have phone calls now, right? He'll give me a phone call and he's like, I just read Angela Davis and I want to talk about it. I just read, The New Jim Crow and I want to talk about it. Do you have any book recommendations? So this is the work and where I'm sort of putting my energy now, right? When people come to me and they ask, do you have something that you can recommend so I can learn more about our prison industrial complex? I'm there, right? And those are the conversations that I'm making time for. So thank you so much for being here, Jonathan.
that is so amazing and such a gift. And I love that in this conversation already, we've pivoted from social media to real conversations, right? That are educating all of us and building relationships. Jonathan, I love all that you've shared here. I'm going to read this whole thing. This is amazing. As the poems were read, this is Jonathan, I could feel the sadness and rage behind each word. Emotions Black people are all too familiar with. Then it reminded me of what America has attempted to do to remedy the atrocities that lead to these feelings. For example, Breonna Taylor's death brought about a law that doesn't really change anything, and a magazine cover, and a TV special, and a wrongful death settlement. It reminded me of a quote by Malcolm X, quote, "The white man will try to satisfy us with symbolic victories rather than economic equity and real justice." Excellent positioning of all of this. But you didn't even hear that from White Lady. Here's the question that Jonathan asks the panelists, y'all. He's saying, as a society, how do we not only differentiate between performative allyship and true reformative change, but also fight for things that will actually achieve justice and equality? Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. That's a thing I'm constantly, thank you for asking that, Jonathan, and thank you for reading that, Kate. That's the thing I'm constantly thinking about in my both poet and non-poet life. What is the reason behind this? What it is that you're doing. I think it starts with goals and objectives, and I interrogate that a lot as I'm, maturing within this like kind of poetry world and interrogating what it means to me to be a poet and what it means for me to be a poet that like wants to actively perform and things like that. I'm always like, okay, if you want me, to be there, am I functioning as a Black person that's giving you like these kind of diversity coins? Like, am I like a diversity face for you? Are you familiar with like my work, right? What is your kind of like material like relationship with community look like? I'm kind of like asking more of those questions. And also when I think about like differentiating between performative allyship and true change, I'm really thinking a lot about like, so what next, right? We're even in this panel, in this talk right now, but it's like, what are you going to do with this information? Because it's one thing to be like listening and learning, but it's one thing to be doing as well. Listening and learning means nothing if it's devoid of doing. So like, I want us to also think about that within the poetry realm. So I'm like writing these social justice poems, right? But like that can be one piece. And I think that it's an important piece because that's the piece that's accessible to everyone, right? Policy making is not a thing that all of us can do, right? Direct action protesting is not a thing that all of us can do, especially like complicated with the pandemic, right? And poetry is the thing that everyone can do, but how are we using poetry within this like broader ecosystem of like gaining justice? I think that's a thing to think about. And as far as like suggestions there, I just always am like, okay, how do I connect, this network of poetry into a broader network. Like I've seen so many more protests like have performances within them. I've seen so many more protests like have these like kind of readings of things before the protest happens. I've seen so many folks like give book proceeds to mutual aid funds into like Black-led organizations. So it's a lot about being creative, and it's a lot about, you know, doing the work, doing the research, but also like doing something with that.
Zoom is so awkward. It's hard to know when to go and not to go. Yes to everything that KB has said. And when you ask your question, Jonathan, something that I think about and something that I deeply believe is that all of us have we are endowed with particular talents and skills, and we can use those as weapons. We can use those talents as weapons. So there are certain spaces that you can enter that I cannot enter. There are certain places that Kate can go that I cannot go. So for me, when I think about literacy and working in community, when I, am doing that teaching, I hope that it ripples out. I hope that it ripples out. So it's important to me that I'm having conversations with my mom, who is in the medical care field, who's in the health field, but who is thinking about liberation in that field, right? It's important that I'm talking to people who are in church spaces and they're thinking about, liberation theology. So I'm thinking about the ripple effect and how important it is at this moment to say no to performative allyship, right? It's fine, that the city decided to paint Black Lives Matter in the street, but that is not enough, and it's not acceptable given that I've lived in Austin, Texas for 10 years and saw the swift and efficient gentrification that happened during that time. So if they are not building housing for Black and Brown people, if they are not bringing them back into the city, if they're making it unsafe for them, if they're still policing, then that mural, that I'm not going to support that. I'm not a part of it, and I'm going to actively say no. And there are some voices that can more actively say no than I can. And it's important that they step into that role and do it. So I think I'm also thinking about how necessary it is to always be making space. It's not enough for us to, achieve what we achieve, get to a place and get comfortable and rest. We have to use our voices, and we have to open up room for others, right? If we're not actually changing the structures that we enter into, then what the hell are we doing, right? And that takes risk. It's a dangerous thing to do.
Yes, I'm gonna break my neck in the amen corner over here on everything that's been said. For me, one of the things that I look for is really understanding the difference between allyship and accomplices, right? Who are your accomplices? An ally can see your struggle from afar and support it from afar. An accomplice is going to have the same skin in the game. And the same as you just mentioned, Sequoia, not all of us can go into the same spaces. That's a reality of where we are at right now. So like when I'm even watching, the call to change leadership and have different people in charge, and put brothers and sisters in charge, I totally agree with that. But the way the system has been set up, sadly, majority of us don't have the proper skills and training to go in and be successful. So then if you make that space, but have not made it to where people have the training and the information they need to be successful in that space, are you truly being an ally and accomplice? Are you setting them up for failure? Are you setting them up to go into that space and not be successful, right? So all of those levels have to be interrogated when you're considering partnership with someone. The other thing is you have to listen. You're an accomplice and a true partner in this work is going to listen more than they talk. They're going to ask you what you need before they tell you what they're bringing. Right now in this pandemic, I currently in my day-to-day job, I work in middle school here in Central Texas, and resources are coming to our campus. They're sending things, and not all of it is actually what we need right now. Like, I'll give you a very real, tangible example. We have a bunch of face shields for students and staff, more than we need. What we don't have is enough plexiglass. If you would have asked me, I would have told you, but we didn't get asked that question. So take that into every avenue of where people are trying to do this work. We have real needs, and it's not always what's going to be convenient for you to provide to us. If you really care, you're going to ask me what I need and listen when I tell you.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. I'm seeing some really great comments happening in the chat amongst panelists and participants. Just want to add a note that if you want to comment to everyone, you can adjust who's receiving your comments. So it can be all panelists if you're a panelist, or all panelists and attendees, just so that those good conversations are happening for other people to see. And thank you for everyone who's chiming in here. And we've got some good questions coming through here too. So another question that's pivoting more towards poems, but I think, Amanda, what you're saying here too is like, these are the everyday things that we're talking about in our poems, right? Like they don't exist in separate spheres. The idea that none of this is, that poetry is somehow distant, or this elevation that's separate from real life, that is part of what we're erasing here in this conversation too, right? So
can we actually pause right there a moment? And I think, one of the things that I'm so excited to be with KB and Amanda, because they're about poetry being for the people and not siloed to some university or academic or journal publication, about making it accessible. And I think that they both approach that in different ways. Could they just talk about that? That's for my own selfish question, you know? What does your community engagement with poetry look like?
That's real. Thank you for asking that, Sequoia. So first things first, before I think about poetry and community engagement, I look inward quite a bit. Like, what do I want from my poems? What do my poems teach me, kind of thing? And I often find that, like, when I write for me, I unlock new levels of empathy. I can communicate more effectively with, like, myself. I can communicate more effectively with my people. And that's how my poems come out. Like, if I can't give this to a person, you know, my best friend, and she read it, you know what I mean? If I can't give this to the person that I imagine in my head reading this, then, like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? And yeah, my target audience is definitely Black folks, definitely queer folks, BIPOC queer folks specifically. I'm thinking of, you know, the Black queer genderless writer that I needed when I was growing up also. Like, I want this to be read at a high school level. I want this to be read for people that I wish had a better relationship with poetry, I guess, because I didn't have a good one in K-12 schools, right? And yeah, when I think of community engagement, I really think of, like, when I get a poem published, me sending it to my friends, and me sending it to all of the people that I want to read it. And if other people that are outside of that target audience get something from it, then, like, yay, you know what I mean? That's great. But I feel most at peace and like I'm engaging with the community on a personal level when I can do that. And as far as like community engagement and like other folks' work, I'm thinking of like amplifying, like usually, right, when people come at me with things, sometimes like in a position to say no, right? I'm like busy, so on and so forth. But I have like a kind of ongoing list where I'm like, hey, not me, but have you checked out this person? Not me, but have you checked out these other people? And I think that's engaging with the community as well. And engaging with the community also by coming to events such as these, and really actually speaking to people, you know what I mean? Like, I just remember my earlier days in Austin, like me going to panels and then me going up and like talking to people afterwards. That's like how I built community around poetry. And then there becomes like this internet community, and then we end up seeing each other at the same events, and then we end up like sharing our poems with each other. I found readers in that way, like people that I end up like sending a pack of poems to, and they send a pack of poems to me, and we're like helping each other on that. That feels like very community driven to me. And I don't know if I would be the poet that I was if it wasn't for like that kind of network building and that kind of like really insistence on my poetry being for me and being good for me, and then also good to the people that I envision consuming this work if that's the thing that I want to do. Also, some poems like stay in my journal, and that's also still fine. If I like send it to one person, I'm like, yay, enough community engagement for that piece. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sequoia, and thank you for sharing that, KB. We have, again, I mean, the same way as like our experiences as individuals and humans in this world, it has multi-points that intersect, right? So there's your engagement with your own work. Why are you writing it in the first place? What is called upon you, called through you, from you, and out into the larger universe. But then for me and my activism, with literary work, with writing, with poetry is very specific and intentional. So like beginning with Torch Literary Arts. Torch Literary Arts came from me seeing a need for Black women first and then girls to have a space where they felt safer, because there's still, you know, masculine patriarchy. I mean, there's still dangerous spaces for women and, you know, non-binary people in our communities, within communities of color. So I wanted to have a space where they could send those poems and feel that they had a home there. When we first started in 2006, I was moved to tears. One of the first submissions I got, I got submissions before the call for submissions was out, had just advertised, and some incredible poets sitting there like, I can't believe you're doing this. I want to be in line for this. So I got submissions before we even opened for submissions, which is beautiful. But I remember getting a submission from a granny, somebody's grandma, sent me a poem. And they said, you know, it doesn't matter if you publish it. My grandchildren told me about this space, and I've never sent a poem anywhere, but I wanted to send it here. That is real impact and change in somebody's life, that they dared to share what they wrote in private with the world, with the possibility of it being out in the world. So I feel that if I have access and space to be able to share that and make those opportunities with others, then it's my responsibility to do so. Same with Cave Canem, you know, and being a part of Cave Canem and now being on the board of Cave Canem, we know that being able to make opportunities for Black poets to see themselves in community with other Black poets at all different levels of their careers is something powerful. And we're working really hard to take away financial barriers, make more opportunities to bring in more Black people into the circle, because just being there, being around your people is powerful. And we're seeing, you know, on different levels. It doesn't matter if you're new to poetry or if you are a US Poet Laureate. We still don't get the luxury of being in rooms that are completely made up of us. We don't get that power, that privilege of being able to walk in a space and see your face reflected back at you. That is a huge impact in somebody's life. So I'm very intentional about the work I'm doing it with Cave Canem to make that available for as many people as possible. And then of course, Black Poets Speak Out. Black Poets Speak Out, taking poetry, again, from people from all different experiences and backgrounds, sharing original work if they're a Black poet, or sharing the work of other published Black poets, but not silencing Black voices for the sake of their own. Sharing Black poems, Black poets' work, and sending it directly to representatives, sending it directly through the letter writing campaign to elected officials demanding justice, and using it as a tool to show that this work is speaking to an audience of millions, and we poets are thousands strong. This is not just me and whatever stereotypical image you have of a poet. We roll deep and we roll hard and we vote. Make sure you're all registered to vote. Thank you.
Amanda, okay, let's lean into some of the things about poetry here. The truths and the untruths, okay? Because what we're talking about too, with all the work that you're doing across Cave Canem, Black Poets Speak Out, Torch Literary Arts, across all that KB is doing with interfaces, across all that Sequoia is doing within the classroom space, there are financial consequences to this. There are emotional consequences to this. There are prices, there are stakes and risk involved. Can we speak to those briefly and be on? Can y'all speak to that and open up that honest, corner? Because I think a lot of times people don't want to talk about this. Yes, Sequoia. And then
I'm just going to be real quick, and then KB, and we can have a big discussion about this, right? So especially during this summer in particular, during this dual pandemic time, as an educator, as artists and creatives, we have been called to participate in Zoom calls, things like this, poetry readings, called to show up. As an educator, I was called to be on the front line for my students, right, as we dealt with death and catastrophe. And it is taxing. So every time I read an elegy, any space that I am asked to go into to read an elegy, I'm gonna read it because that's why I wrote it. Quite frankly, I don't give a damn if they're published. What I do care about is that they're performed and that people hear them, right? And receive them and perhaps feel them and perhaps move to action because of them, right? And every time that I'm called to read an elegy, it takes something from me. It is a difficult thing to do. It takes me back to the moment that I wrote it. It takes me back to all the traumas that I've experienced, right? I just read this beautiful essay by Elizabeth Alexander, the poet and scholar, who is talking, it's called the Trayvon Generation. And she's talking about this generation, right, that is being indelibly changed by what they are seeing and being inundated with daily. And I think of myself and I'm like, I'm the Latasha Harlins generation. I'm the Rodney King generation. I'm the Hurricane Katrina generation. This has been happening. And to write the poetry is necessary and a needful, beautiful thing, but it is also taxing. And quite frankly, creatives, Black creatives are not being paid for that work, and that's a problem, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that brings up a really important conversation. What are the risks? Thank you for that, Kate, involved in this work. So I failed to talk about interfaces earlier, so I'll talk about it now. So about like maybe 2.5 years ago now, I moved to Austin, Texas, right? And I'm like, okay, so based on my life in other cities, I know that I feel my most at home when I'm within community, like arts community, social justice community, both of those at the same time, ideally, right? So within like 2 months or so of living in Austin, I go to like every single open mic, every single like reading series, every single thing that I possibly could go to. And I just find that there is this thing, right? There is this like insistence on me like kind of fragmenting myself if I go into specific spaces, right? If I'm going into an open mic that is, centering Black people, right? I'm not always sure that my queerness is going to be accepted there. When I'm going into this space like that is specifically for queer folks, I'm not sure that my Blackness is going to be accepted there. And if we're doing like LGBTQIA plus stuff for real, if we're talking about it for real, that community can still be very transphobic. You know what I mean? So it's just all of this stuff. And then also this like non-existent like cognizance of like the different needs that people have maybe when they're experiencing some kind of like heavy stuff, right? Like if I'm talking about, sexual assault, maybe like let me know beforehand, or like if someone is on the mic saying something potentially problematic that's potentially gonna hurt me, that's gonna like hurt me past them just saying it for 2 minutes at an open mic, like is there a response to that? And from that I thought up I thought up this thing called Interfaces. Interfaces is a community initiative that works to both nurture and amplify artists with marginalized backgrounds here in the Austin area. And it came from this vision of like, what does an diverse, but also inclusive, but also accessible, and but also like not $25 to get in like art scene look like. You know what I mean? So then I was like, how do I weld all of this love into a concept? And that's kind of what I've been attempting to do with Interfaces for the past 2 years. Most recently, we have this zine coming out called Do You Want a Revolution? ATX Artists on the Carceral State. So we're really trying to amplify people talking about, you know, not just prisons and police, but also institutionalization. We're seeing that a lot with what's in the news even right now. And then mental health institutionalization, like what does that look like? And how does that impact someone long term? And the hope there is that it can get in the hands of legislators. So like I've just talked to maybe like a city councilor maybe last week about these kinds of things, right? But it can also get into the hands of like really people that need it, people that need the like validation and the representation within those pages, people that need visual art, people that need educational resources. And when I think about the risks of doing the work that Interfaces has done, on top of the zine project, we have artist showcase open mic that happens every month that specifically only features marginalized voices. We have another program, Art and Social Justice, that is about artists on something, and it's like artists that do like groundwork as well as do art. Is very interesting. We just had one on like artists on climate change. We were able to like find some people in Austin that do like climate change work as well as poetry. But I just think about, yeah, it's mentally and emotionally taxing, absolutely, to do this work because especially, and even we're seeing it right now in the news, that critical thinking about the not equitable, the not great conditions of America is really, really trying to be oppressed out of us. You know what I mean? And it's hard to come up against that every day. It's hard to be expected also as a poet to do this kind of like dual work of like coming in and educating you for free about these things, coming in so that you can look good, you know, within your respective arts community, even though maybe you've had like a lineup of completely white people for the past year or something like that. And then also coming in and being an artist. We're being asked to do a lot right now. So I want to just like put that in the room and say that especially around June, I had to just honestly put down some boundaries where I was just like, this is what I can and can't do. And these are the questions that I'm going to ask beforehand. You know what I mean? We were just talking about this, me, Sequoia, and Amanda earlier, but it's like, I can't really pay bills with like listening and learning. I can't really pay bills, you know what I mean, with hopes and dreams. I can't really pay bills with like performative allyship, if we even want to take it there. And if you like me enough to feature me, then you also like me enough to pay me, right? If you like me enough that like my work resonates with you so much, then also like take the short road to maybe some other poets that can educate you on some other things, maybe to some other thought leaders that are also talking about these concepts, and maybe up like even farther to like donating to your local mutual aid funds to like really redistribute that wealth, you know what I mean? And really like put yourself in positions where you may lose some privilege just so it levels out this playing field that's been inequitable for 400 years. So those are the things, those are the risks, but they feel so worth it because I feel really inspired by the things that I get to see through the work at Interfaces. Like Amanda was saying, like that very real like feeling of like, I didn't know that I could do this until I stepped on this mic. I didn't know that I could do that. Like, I didn't know that people could do that in poetry even. It's just really amazing to see those like guards come down. And I feel very lucky to be within poetry because poetry literally is a thing that everyone can do. I think everyone has the capacity to be a poet. You know what I mean? That's the thing that at least if everything is going to be unequal, that everyone has. And there aren't a lot of rules. You really can do anything. It's vibes and poetry. And I love that about it.
Well said, KB. Absolutely. I just want to add to everything that you just said that we also as human beings deserve the sweetness in life. We deserve what you reserve, when I say you, I mean the larger wide community that is equally oppressing us. You do reserve sweetness. You reserve the niceties for yourself, for your people. We deserve those things too. So when you're reaching for us, when you're looking for us to come into your spaces, to have challenging conversations, don't just look at us as a doorway into that, because that's a lot of heavy lifting for us mentally, emotionally, physically, to be able to share that work with you. But we have a lot of poems as well. We have poems on all kinds of things. Invite us to your Valentine's Day reading. Invite us to your summer lit fest reading. Invite us to your large festival, et cetera, reading. And the same niceties and luxuries and love that you put on that certain X whatever person, poet, that you're drooling over, save some of that for us too. We need that too, to be able to live and to step into those rooms. We need to be, not just have the spotlight cast on us, we need to have comfortable places to sit down and rest, to be able to keep coming back and creating and doing this work. I want to plug Hedgebrook. If you've never heard of Hedgebrook, people should know about Hedgebrook too. I was supposed to be at Hedgebrook this summer and pandemic. So thankfully I should be going back next summer if everything allows. But what they practice at Hedgebrook is radical hospitality, what they call it, radical hospitality. That it is a safe place for you to come and stay. No funding necessary. You just get yourself there, and they give you funding for that if you need it, if you need to get yourself there. It's up on an island off the coast of Washington. You get a cabin, gourmet meals. It's beautiful, and you just get to go there and write. We are all deserving of that. And if you care about this work that we're doing, if you care about our lives, and you have access to things like that, remember us then too. Remember us for those lists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, just like I said before, you are always creating homes for others. You deserve others to be creating home spaces for you too, right? Hedgebrook sounds like a space that is offering that, and we need more, certainly. I know we are pushing close to the end of time, but we have a really wonderful question on here that I want to make sure is addressed. So maybe we can make this our final question for the night, and feel free to plug and talk about anything else that you want to add here. This is from Kameen. Kameen asks, what is the place of poetry, personal narrative in moments like this? Are there limitations? This is such a great question in relation to limitations of what you can do and offer of yourself in poems.
I put a brief answer in the question to the chat, and I won't take up too much time, Kimene. But I said, for me, I think that the limitations are structural. I think this sort of builds off what KB was saying, is that everyone can sort of do poetry. They can enter poetry. One of the things that I recommend for any student that I have, whether they're within the English major or they're coming from outside, is to keep a journal, to keep a diary, to keep a place to collect your inside thoughts and feelings, because that's how we make sense. That's how we know who we are, what we want, what our dreams and desires are. We have to sift through all of that. And writing is a process of sifting that is so beautiful and can bring clarity to your life. So I think personal narratives are necessary for us. And when it comes to other people consuming those narratives, when it comes to putting your poetry out there, I really believe that the limitations are just structural. I think that there are institutions, publications that will say, oh, we only take this kind of poetry, or we're only interested in this kind of voice, or we're looking at this right now, rewarding this, and that kind of poetry is of the past. And it's kind of like, well, who the hell is to tell you what your art is supposed to be? So I think the question really is, why are you writing? To whom are you writing? And what would you like your writing to do? I don't think that there are limitations. I think they just exist up here. And then I think that there is also a world that will tell you there are limitations, but it's our job as poets, as artists, to dream beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to tell a small anecdotal story about a poem in the book, and another way to say enter. First of all, that's another way. You write your poems for you. You write them to get the work that you need out onto the page, and then you do the work of crafting it. Nikki Finney said, throw the glass against the wall, put the poem on the page. Right. So you find this way between whatever that urgent thing is in your life, in your narrative, in your true lived world, and then it comes out and transfers and makes its way to the page, and it might be something very different. That's the craft work of a poet, of a writer. I always say they teach you how to write, when you go into elementary school grammar, they teach you how to write a sentence, but writers and poets revise, and they keep going back, and then they're listening to the work and saying, oh, I thought it was going to be this, but now it's evolving into something completely different, right? And so you learn through skill and time what that's going to end up being. But just to advocate on not limiting yourself and listening and trusting yourself on what needs to be out in the world, after you've written it. When I was working through the book with my editor, there was a poem that they didn't think was ready to be in the book. And I felt very strongly that that poem had to be in the book. It had to be published and out in the world. And I did a couple revisions, and then we came together. She's like, "Yes, let's put it in the book." And that's the poem. We Named You Mercy was then shared as a poem a day with the Academy of American Poets. And is out there for way more people than we're just going to see it through the publication, because the Academy has such a strong reach. But that's knowing, no, this, you have to listen to yourself, and you know best before what that outside world and other people start deciding what is ready and what isn't, and what is, intended for public consumption. You need to know what you want to say, and then that's what you put out there.
Real. I'm loving these replies, y'all. Y'all were like teaching me. With like, when I think of personal narratives in poetry, I think a lot about how so much of my poetry and the poetry of people I love, including folks on the call, it's just like archival. Like, one thing that I never want people to say is that Black, queer, genderless people did not exist during this time, right? And like, these sentiments, these things that people are going to be feeling 20 years from now did not exist 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Can't nobody tell me that Blackness and queerness and the complication of that doesn't exist in poetry when people like Essex Hemphill are here, when people like Jericho Brown are here. You know what I mean? And people like Xandria Phillips are here talking about gender and talking about Blackness. You know what I mean? And I think that when I'm thinking about my personal narrative, I'm thinking about like, though, like, someone needs to hear this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that someone, but I do know that my experience is not a siloed one. My experience is a unique one, but it's not nearly like one that has not been felt before. I guess I'm a believer in like all feelings have been felt, right? Maybe I don't know about them. And when I find them in books, that is just the most exhilarating thing ever. And I want someone to, find that feeling, that level of representation somewhere. So I think every time is a good time for, poetry and personal narratives. I don't think that I would have been able to write the poems that feel so far away from my experience if I didn't have this root in the world, have this root in like what's happening now, have this root of like what I feel every day. You know what I mean? And I think that poetry can just like not really be devoid of self, even if you're writing like sci-fi. I was reading this piece by Octavia Butler or something like not too long ago, and she's talking about like aliens and all of this other stuff. But like, it was this book. I love this book. I can't remember what it's called right now, but it was a book like with her kind of writing introductions to every single thing. And then she wrote this introduction about like this specific brand of bugs that she didn't know about, that she was really scared about on a plane or something like that. So therefore she wrote this sci-fi. You know what I mean? So like, everything comes from the personal, I think. We can't create worlds unless we've lived them to some degree. And it could be like lived through other people. You know what I mean? I've written poems based on stories that my grandmother has told me about growing up in like the 60s and not really experiencing racism until she moved from Queens to North Carolina. You know what I mean? Like, that's a thing that I feel so deeply. And that's the thing that still feels very personal to me. Not in a co-opty way, but in a like it's in my bloodline kind of way. You know what I mean? So I don't know, poetry, personal narrative in moments like this and in every moment. I think that there's always a good time to make sure that you like know that you're here. Also, let's like, I don't know, build that Austin History Center archive. You know what I mean? They're taking poems right now, actually. It's like COVID-19 files. Submit.
Yes. And shout out to Kimberly Keaton, who is the community archivist overseeing that project right now. Kimberly's doing a fantastic job leading all of those efforts at the Austin History Center. Thank y'all. That was great. We have, I think we've gone a little bit over time, but before we exit, I want to give y'all the opportunity to answer a question that I think a lot of people have had on their minds, which is like, what can we do, right? Like, what can readers do? What is needed, right? Like Amanda said, ask what is needed. So what would kind of be like final thoughts to share in that vein for others to take away from tonight?
I'm gonna say one that I always come to quick. That question, what can we do? Google first, okay? People tired. I mean that. People are tired. You ask, if you're asking that question to me, assume 100 other people probably ask that same question, right? So Google first, do your research. You've heard people say, do your work, like that's a real thing, do your work. And then maybe come to me with the more specific question. Like, I'm in education, we're working on a poetry unit. Could you add blah, blah, blah? Like, get that down, filter that down, so I'm not having to, or you're not expecting me, because me doing it is another thing, but you're not expecting me to do your work for you. So Google first, do your research, and then find where you can fit in. And like I said earlier, just remember that what you have to offer might not be what we need. And if you're really down for this work, then you're going to be down to pivot into what it is that we need.
When it comes to steps at this moment, we're coming up on an election. We need to vote, not only vote, we need to get people registered. We need to drive people to the polls. We need to do those everyday action things. And I don't want to sort of end on a bad note, but I also feel like it's very important to say in this moment that we are living in a very dangerous time. I think that some things have shifted when it comes to public protest, and we are seeing that there are weapons of war in our streets that our president and this administration has called critical race studies anti-American. I think that our safety is, our freedoms are being violated continually, and this is only going to ramp up. Activists and organizers are facing the repercussions of state repression, and we're just at the beginning of this wave of repression, and it's going to keep happening. So I think that if there was any time, if people haven't already gotten their hands dirty and gotten into the work, you got to get into the work because you're late, and we need everybody.
Yes, echo to all of that. And also, I think I would say kill the like idea of like complete independence in your head. We live in a very interdependent society. Like we can't, and if the pandemic has taught me nothing else, it has taught me that we can't just live in boxes. We can't live without people. So we need to start acting like things that don't directly affect us don't like still matter. You know what I mean? Things that are outside of our experience don't still matter. And I think that cross-issue solidarity, cross-identity solidarity is definitely needed. So talking to people, right? What can readers do, right? When you learn this knowledge, sharing it with other people, even the ones that don't agree with you, even the ones that are not within your like echo chamber, like sharing it with that. Sharing it with the best thing that I've heard probably in the last 2 weeks is like someone being like, I read this poem and then I read it to my mom and we worked out some issues based on what was said in this poem. Like those are the kinds of gains that I'd love to see from readers, that I'd love to see from consumers of poetry. Really be sharing this, you know, outside of your box, because we need each other and we need everybody to, you know, get on board. Like Sequoia was saying, we need everyone to like have all of your learning tools ready so we can transform. We can't transform unless you know the basics, but we can't transform also if you keep your knowledge to yourself. Like individualism is a social construct, you know, like put in our heads because capitalism, because they want us to work our bodies like machines, but we are not machines. You know what I mean? We are people that need other people. And I want us to like kill this idea of like just throwing people away. Also, like we need everybody. You know, nobody is not willing, not able to change, right? Of course, we can't bring people along that are like for real, just like set in their ways. Maybe it feels like not a lot of energy needs to go there, but energy can go somewhere else, you know, to that cousin, you know, to that colleague that maybe said something problematic within your class. Talk to them, you know what I mean? Because if you don't, who will? That's it there.
Audible clapping for that. Thank you. I'm so glad this is being recorded right now, y'all. We are going to house this so that this conversation can reach others beyond the people who are just here and present with us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I've been taking notes the whole conversation, and we are going to be sharing everything that we've discussed this evening in a follow-up email that will be coming from me. So attendees, if you're like, wait, I didn't catch that, what was that thing that was just mentioned? We'll be sending you links and resource lists so that you can continue to learn and grow beyond this, because like we said, this is insufficient. This in and of itself isn't anything. This is just a Zoom on a Thursday night. So thank you for being here and for having this conversation. I really appreciate each of you, Amanda, Sequoia, and KB. And thank you to all the attendees. Y'all could have been anywhere, like Sequoia said, and you came here and you showed up and you stayed here, and we appreciate you guys. And we're gonna be following up, and there will be other opportunities for you to continue this. KB is leading a workshop for us in November, and we'll be having more information that we'll share with you on that. It's called Freedom House. It's about how to set your own goals for your writing and how to do some of this work that we've talked about tonight. So thanks y'all so much. And if any final thoughts, or are we good to head out?
Peace, love. Keep peace and love close to you.
Just that I love you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, be safe, stay safe. Please take care of each other. And have a good rest of your evening if you can. Bye.